So when it comes to bullying, we've all heard of David and Goliath. The story goes that young David was minding his own business, tending to his flock of sheep, when one day he hears some commotion coming from a nearby town. So he runs into town and sees that the Israelites and the Philistines are gathered together in full battle gear, ready to duke it out. And there in the middle of them is this huge Philistine giant named Goliath, who's challenging the Israelites to send someone to fight him in single combat. And if they win, the Philistines will be forced to retreat. If they lose, the Philistines get to come into their town and plunder it. Now, the Israelite soldiers are understandably afraid of Goliath because he's huge, like 9 feet tall, with armor that weighs about 175 pounds, which means most of the Israelites aren't even brave enough to try to fight him. Instead, they just stand around and watch for 5 whole days as Goliath taunts them. But on the 6th day, David comes along, sees what's going on, and says, "Hey, don't worry guys, I got this." And then David does this really weird thing where he asks for a helmet and a spear and some armor, but the armor doesn't fit. So he just takes off his shepherd's bag, fills it with stones, and then slings it over his shoulder. And then the Israelites all start laughing at him because they think he's crazy, except for King Saul, who isn't really sure why he's the king of Israel. But he's pretty sure that letting a kid in a bag fight a giant probably isn't the best idea. So he tries to stop David, but David insists that God is going to help him and refuses to back down until Saul gives him permission to do whatever he wants. And because Saul isn't actually good at being a king, he lets David go and face the giant on his own. Now, if you've ever played the game Rocket League, it's kind of like when David got up to face Goliath, he had a ton of momentum behind him, like he'd been running toward the giant the whole time. But then he stopped so suddenly that he slid right underneath Goliath's feet and landed right next to him. And because Goliath was way too busy screaming insults at the Israelites to notice David standing right there, David took one of the stones out of his bag, loaded it into his makeshift sling, took aim, and let it fly. And to be fair, he didn't exactly hit Goliath in the neck or anything. He actually hit him right in the forehead. But since Goliath had never been hit in the forehead by a stone before, he didn't know how much that hurt, and he fell down dead right there in the street. Then David ran over, grabbed Goliath's own sword, and chopped off his head. And the mere sight of that made the Philistines drop their weapons and run away. Then David came back to town and was immediately swarmed by an angry mob of Israelites who wanted to know why he hadn't died fighting the giant. And they were especially mad at David for killing Goliath because now they couldn't take the Philistines' weapons. But David just told them to chill out because it wasn't about the weapons. It was about God. In fact, David was so anti-materialism that he wouldn't even accept the reward that King Saul offered him after the fight. And when Saul tried to give him his daughter's hand in marriage and half of his kingdom, David was all, "Nah, I'm good." So if David wasn't interested in power or treasure, why did he kill Goliath? Well, there are 2 possible answers to that question. The first answer is that David killed Goliath simply because Goliath was a bully. I mean, have you ever been at the playground and watched a bigger kid threaten everyone to give him their toys? It's not fun. And sometimes the only way to make a bully stop is to stand up to them, even if you're scared. And for David, that might have been as easy as picking up a rock and hitting the giant in the face. But the second answer is a little more complicated, and it has everything to do with the way that people view themselves and their place in the world. See, in the Bible, David is described as a young shepherd, someone who spends all his time taking care of sheep. And the image of the shepherd is really important because it symbolizes David's humility and his ability to lead the Israelites. You see, shepherds weren't usually seen as powerful or wealthy. They were seen as kind of low on the totem pole. But in the Bible, David is described as having a heart after God's own heart. And that suggests that David knew he wasn't strong or tall or even particularly skilled in combat, but he still felt called to do what was right. And in facing down Goliath, David wasn't just standing up for himself or the other Israelites. He was also affirming his own self-worth. In a lot of ways, David could have seen himself as less than Goliath. After all, he was a poor shepherd, and Goliath was a fearsome giant. But David knew that even though he was small and underestimated, he was still valuable because he still had worth in God's eyes. And that's something that each of us has to remind ourselves of from time to time. That no matter how big or intimidating or downright terrifying someone else seems, we're still worthy and deserving of love and belonging. And sometimes all we need to find that out is a bag full of rocks and a really good aim. So now I want to hear from you. How does the story of David and Goliath speak to your life experience? What does it mean to you? And what lessons can we learn from it today? Let me know in the comments below. And if you're looking for more stories like this one, you can check out another series I do called Holy Smokes. These are stories about biblical heroes that we all know, like Moses, Abraham, and Joseph, but they're not exactly known for. These stories are filled with adventure and intrigue, and they're a great way to dive deeper into the characters and stories of the Bible. For example, there's a story about Moses that most people don't know. After spending 40 days on Mount Sinai with God receiving the 10 Commandments and all that stuff, Moses comes down the mountain and sees that the Israelites have built a golden calf while he was gone, and they're celebrating with a huge party. And Moses is so angry that he throws down the stone tablets containing the 10 Commandments and breaks them to pieces. And then God tells Moses, "Okay, I guess you're not going to be the one to lead my people to the promised land after all." And Moses is devastated. He'd given up everything to follow God and do his work, and now he'll never get to see the promised land. But instead of giving up, Moses does something really cool. He tells God, "Hey, I may not be able to lead them there, but I've got Joshua. He's a great leader and he's eager to do your work. So how about you just let him lead them in instead?" And God looks down at Joshua and decides, "You know what? I like him. He's got leadership potential for sure. We'll let him lead them in." And that's why Joshua is such a prominent leader in the Old Testament after Moses dies. Anyway, those are the kinds of stories that I share over on the Holy Smokes channel. There are all kinds of lesser-known stories about the people of faith who changed the course of history, and I would love for you to check it out. You can find the link to subscribe below, and I hope to see you over there. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching and have a great week. Bye.